Yo, what went down on First Take this morning regarding Giannis Antetokounmpo's motivations for wanting to leave Milwaukee and specifically targeting New York as his preferred destination is going to make you realize that this isn't just about basketball fit or market size. This is about fundamental organizational dysfunction in Milwaukee, a complete breakdown of trust between a generational superstar and his front office, and Giannis's genuine belief that the Knicks roster gives him the best chance to win another championship before his prime years are over. And I'm not talking about some vague dissatisfaction that can be smoothed over with a few roster tweaks or a nice dinner meeting with ownership. We're talking about Shams Charania reporting that the Bucks made major long-term financial commitment, including signing Miles Turner to a 4-year, $108 million contract and absorbing the remaining $113 million on Damian Lillard's deal without even consulting Giannis or seeking his approval, despite him being the franchise cornerstone and two-time MVP. We're talking about Giannis explicitly airing his concerns about whether Milwaukee's current roster can truly achieve championship contention after watching them struggle in the playoffs year after year. And most importantly, we're talking about Ian Begley confirming that winning a title specifically in New York appeals to Giannis and is one of the primary reasons he views the Knicks as his ideal destination rather than any of the other potential landing spots around the league. When Molly Karam set up the segment by announcing that blockbuster trade rumors are intensifying and we now have specific details about why Giannis wants out of Milwaukee and why New York is his target, when Stephen A. Smith came on screen with that look in his eyes that Knicks fans know means he's about to deliver potentially franchise-altering information. When the panel started breaking down the timeline of when trade discussions could realistically happen, and whether it's more likely at the deadline or next summer, I had to pause my coffee and lean forward, because this wasn't just typical first-take speculation designed to generate debate. This was concrete reporting with specific details about organizational dysfunction, contract decisions, and Giannis's mental state that paints a complete picture of why this trade is inevitable rather than just possible. So I'm watching First Take during what started as their standard morning programming, discussing various NBA storylines, and suddenly they pivot to breaking news about Giannis with graphics on screen, and you could feel the entire energy shift because everyone in that studio understood this was potentially the biggest NBA story of the season. Stephen A. was barely containing his excitement as a die-hard Knicks fan, but he was also trying to maintain journalistic credibility by sticking to what's actually been reported, rather than just wishful thinking. The tension between his fandom and his professionalism was palpable and honestly made for incredible television. Let me paint you the complete and comprehensive picture of what really transpired during this extended segment that went deep into both the Milwaukee dysfunction and the New York appeal, because the surface-level Giannis wants to be a Knick headline that you're seeing everywhere completely misses the specific organizational failures that have pushed him to this point. The detailed reasons why New York's roster construction and championship timeline align perfectly with what he's looking for, the complex trade mechanics and timing considerations that will determine when this actually happens, and the uncomfortable reality that Milwaukee's front office has so thoroughly alienated their franchise player that there's essentially no path to repairing this relationship even if they wanted to try. Here's the foundational reporting from Shams that explains exactly why Giannis has lost faith in Milwaukee's decision-making. It was a massive long-term financial commitment for the Bucks to sign Miles Turner to that 4-year, $108 million contract. And then there's the additional cap hit from the remaining $113 million on Damian Lillard's deal that will stay on Milwaukee's books for the next 5 seasons, regardless of whether Lillard is actually still productive or even on the roster. These were full-fledged efforts by the front office to keep Giannis happy by surrounding him with talent and trying to build a championship contender, which on the surface seems like exactly what a franchise should be doing for their superstar. But here's the problem that completely changed Giannis's perspective. The Bucks had not sought his approval or even consulted with him before making these massive financial moves, just as they hadn't required his input or blessing when they acquired Damian Lillard from the Portland Trail Blazers back in 2023. Stephen A. Smith was making this absolutely critical point during his analysis. When you're a franchise and you have a generational talent like Giannis Antetokounmpo, who's won you a championship and multiple MVPs and has been the face of your organization for over a decade, you don't make franchise-altering decisions worth hundreds of millions of dollars without at least consulting with that player to get his thoughts. It's not about giving him final say or letting him be the de facto general manager. It's about basic respect and organizational communication. The fact that Milwaukee has now done this multiple times, first with the Lillard trade and now with the Turner signing, sends a clear message to Giannis that the front office doesn't value his input or perspective on roster construction. But that organizational disrespect and lack of consultation isn't even the primary reason Giannis wants out. And this is where the basketball analysis becomes crucial to understanding his motivation. Giannis fundamentally doesn't believe that Milwaukee's current roster can get the job done and win a championship, regardless of what moves they make around the margin. Shams' reporting was incredibly revealing on this point. When Bucks management expressed their confidence in the roster they'd assembled and the moves they'd made to improve the team, Giannis responded by airing his genuine concerns about whether this team could truly achieve championship contention rather than just being a decent playoff team that gets bounced in the first or second round every year. Giannis wanted to explore whether there would be an alternative path forward for both the team and himself, which is executive speak for, "I don't think this is working, and we need to consider other options, including me leaving." That's an absolutely devastating indictment of where Milwaukee's roster stands from the perspective of the guy who has to actually go out and try to carry them to a title every season. And here's the thing that Stephen A. kept emphasizing throughout this segment. Giannis isn't some diva demanding a trade because he's unhappy with his hotel accommodations or wants more media attention. This is a championship-obsessed competitor who's already proven he can win a title, who's dedicated his entire prime to one organization, and who's now looking around the league at various rosters and reaching the honest conclusion that Milwaukee's current situation doesn't give him the best chance to win another championship before his window closes. And that brings us to why New York specifically has emerged as his preferred destination, rather than any of the other potential landing spots like Miami or the Lakers or Golden State. Ian Begley's reporting provided crucial insight here. A source confirmed that the Knicks and Bucks had cursory talks about a potential Giannis deal back in August, though those discussions never reached an advanced level where they were seriously negotiating trade packages and finalizing details. But what's most important from Begley's reporting is that winning a title specifically in New York genuinely appeals to Giannis and would be one of the primary reasons why he views the Knicks as his ideal destination. Think about what that means for a second. It's not just about joining a good team or going to a big market. It's specifically about winning a championship in New York City at Madison Square Garden with the Knicks organization. That's a legacy-defining accomplishment that would cement Giannis's place in basketball history in ways that winning another title in Milwaukee or joining an already established super team somewhere else wouldn't achieve. Stephen A. was going absolutely wild, talking about the mystique of winning at the Garden and how Giannis understands that bringing a championship to New York would elevate his entire career legacy and cultural impact in ways that are hard to quantify but undeniably real. The Knicks, along with many other teams around the league, have been monitoring Giannis's situation closely and will continue doing so as the season progresses, because everyone in NBA front offices understands that when a player of his caliber becomes even potentially available, you have to at least explore what it would take to acquire him. But New York has a specific advantage here because Giannis has already identified them as his preferred landing spot, which dramatically simplifies the trade logistics and leverage dynamics if and when Milwaukee decides they need to move him. Here's a fascinating detail about the timeline that reveals how seriously the Knicks have been pursuing this. The majority of discussions between New York and Milwaukee this past summer took place after the Knicks and Michael Bridges agreed to his contract extension. Due to the specific structure and timing of that extension, Bridges became ineligible to be traded immediately and can't be dealt until February 1st because of the CBA rules around recently extended players. That timing restriction matters because it affects what packages the Knicks could potentially offer at different points during the season, versus waiting until the summer, when all their players and draft assets would be available to include in negotiation. Begley's reporting also emphasized a critical point about how this trade would actually have to go down. As was the case over the summer, when preliminary discussions happened, Giannis would need the Bucks to work cooperatively with him on his preferred trade destination rather than just trading him to whoever offers the best package, or, alternatively, Giannis would need to make things uncomfortable enough and force his way out of Milwaukee by making it clear he won't re-sign with any other team besides New York. That second option is the nuclear scenario where Giannis essentially torpedoes his own trade value to ensure he ends up where he wants to be. Similar to what we've seen with other disgruntled stars in recent years. The timing question of when this trade actually happens became a major point of debate during the segment, with different perspectives on whether it's more likely at the February trade deadline or waiting until next summer. Many league executives and analysts believe the trade probably won't happen until next offseason, because deals of this magnitude involving franchise players rarely get consummated mid-season when teams are still evaluating their championship chances. But if you ask Giannis and his representation, he's not necessarily waiting for next offseason if Milwaukee continues looking like they're not genuine championship contenders. If the Bucks stumble badly during the first half of the season, and it becomes obvious they're not going to make a deep playoff run, Giannis could potentially explore requesting a trade at the deadline, rather than wasting another 6 months in a situation he doesn't believe in. Reporting indicates that Giannis and his agent have actually been reviewing which teams could realistically acquire him at the trade deadline from both a salary matching and asset perspective, which suggests they're at least considering that timeline as a possibility, rather than automatically waiting until summer. There's been a widespread expectation around the league for quite some time now that Giannis's days in Milwaukee are numbered one way or another. It's just a question of when and to where, rather than if. Whether it happens this season at the deadline, or during the off-season, or potentially even extending into next season, the general consensus is that this relationship has run its course, and a split is inevitable. Milwaukee stakeholders reportedly understand internally that this is essentially a make-or-break season with Giannis's long-term future, with the franchise hanging in the balance through the 2025-26 season, so the pressure on them to perform at a championship level immediately is immense. But here's the harsh reality that makes a Giannis trade even more likely. It's genuinely unlikely that Milwaukee will be able to achieve what Giannis wants them to achieve this season, given their roster construction and the competition in both conferences. That means a trade becomes inevitable rather than just possible. And while Giannis may explore his options at the deadline, the most realistic scenario is probably that nothing happens mid-season, and then serious trade discussions ramp up next summer, when Giannis has maximum leverage because he'll be entering the final year of his contract extension. Something crucial that needs to be understood about the leverage dynamics. Giannis will have his peak negotiating power in the summer of 2026, when he becomes eligible to sign a massive extension worth hundreds of millions of dollars. At that point, he can essentially tell the entire league, "I'm only signing an extension with the Knicks," which would crater his trade value to other teams, but ensure he ends up where he wants to be. That's why right now, the Knicks aren't in any particular rush to force something. They know a Giannis trade is coming eventually. They can see the writing on the wall. They already explored it this past offseason, even though nothing materialized. But what actually did happen from those exploratory discussions is significant. they let the entire NBA world know that out of all the potential trades they could make, the only superstar acquisition they're genuinely pursuing is Giannis Antetokounmpo. And conversely, they helped establish that the only team Giannis wants to be traded to is the New York Knicks. That mutual interest is now common knowledge around the league, which will shape all future trade discussions and leverage consideration. Now, maybe at the February deadline, other teams emerge as possibilities and circumstances change based on how various contenders are performing. But if Giannis wants to have it his way and control his own destiny, he wants to join the Knicks specifically, rather than just leaving Milwaukee for any generic destination. And if that preference remains firm, maybe he does explore forcing the issue at the deadline. But ultimately, the most likely scenario is that a trade happens next summer during the off-season, when there's more time to negotiate complex multi-team deals, and when the Knicks have maximum flexibility with their roster and asset. Here's what really emerged from this entire First Take segment. A blockbuster Giannis trade is coming sooner than most people think. The organizational dysfunction in Milwaukee has completely alienated their franchise player to the point where the relationship is irreparable. Giannis specifically wants to win a championship in New York because of the legacy implications and because he genuinely believes the Knicks roster gives him the best chance to compete for titles. And Leon Rose has been methodically positioning the franchise for years to be ready to make this exact move when the opportunity presents itself. The only questions remaining are about timing and trade package specifics, but the destination is already clear.